Helen Van Wyk says that if you know what you're doing, you can paint with a broom. Well, one of our viewers requested that I show my foliage stroke. I'm not so sure we could do that with a broom, but let's see what we can do with a brush. Now, first of all, I want to make clear, I've always got to give my little lecture. Your individual and unique stroke is going to be your own. I really kind of cringe at some artists that I know who teach only by brush stroke. This is the stroke you make for a flower petal, and this is the stroke you make for a leaf. Well, that's that artist's stroke. And if you continue to make that artist's stroke, then your flowers and your petals and your flowers and leaves and all are going to look just like that artist. They're not going to be yours. So my approach to making foliage, is to, first of all, understand what the brush will do, or what various brushes will do, and then comprehend or imagine what shape I want or what mark I want, and how the brush can make that mark happen. Now let's see if I can guide you kind of step by step towards what I'm talking about. First of all, understand your brush, know what it will do. We've got all kinds of brushes. You've got your favorite brushes. I've got my favorite brushes. We have brushes, some brushes that are stiffer and more precise, like this little rosemary brush I have here. We have brushes that are a little bit more flexible. This is a rosemary brush too, just a different kind. And then we have brushes that are very, very flexible, like this little lang nickel I have here. And we have brushes that are called the natural hair, like this one. All kinds of brushes we have available. So the thing is to play with the brush, get to know the brush, and then try to imagine all of its capabilities by playing with it, see what it will do. Probably any brush you've got would create foliage. It depends on how you manipulate it. So let's look. That's one thing. That's one attitude to take. Get to know your brush and then find out what it will do, and then we figure how we can make it make foliage. Then the other thing is, what do you mean by foliage? I have what I refer to as my foliage stroke. As I move, this is just a little stroke I've developed over the years. It just kind of evolved, but I don't always depend upon that. I don't necessarily look at the foliage and think foliage stroke and then start stroking, but I use that to interpret what I'm seeing in front of me. So here we see foliage that develops a pattern. You see a pattern around the edge. We see that we see some white space in between it, and then so we see more texture, more like a texture than we do anything else. So that's one way foliage appears. Another way foliage appears is in clusters like this. We'll see clusters of leaves, and that cluster will be forming texture. There'll be different kinds of light, different kinds of shadows, and so we would form those in sort of a different way. Here it would find a closer up cluster of leaves, and here a more distant, more distant view of leaves, and so this one becomes almost totally all texture. So what do we do with that? Well, here's where I would start if I were you exploring. First of all, exploring your brush. Okay, you can start with your favorite brush. Now, my favorite brush, kind of over the years, since I discovered it, is this little Rosemary Series 274. I've found that it can do almost anything any other brush can do. And it happens to be a flat brush. So what do I need to know? Well, I'll just load a little bit of color here. The way to explore what it will do, I'll look at this shape and I'll say, now, what can my brush do that can show me that? All right, what do I know that my brush can do? I know that when I pull my brush this way, I can get that. I know when I push against my brush and turn it, I can get that. And that ends up being interpreting to a point what I'm seeing about right here, or what I'm seeing about right there. Now, let me do that slowly again, so you could practice. Maybe you could practice moving your brush in the way you see me. So see what your brush does when you move it on its tip like that. See what your brush does when you push. If you simply push like that, what does it do? When you pull your brush, if you pull your brush towards its tip, once the paint is loaded on the brush, if you pull your brush on its tip like this and you turn it in your hand, what does it do? If you pull your brush on its tip like this and you push and turn in your hand, what does it do? If you start your brush, if you load your brush and you pull it on its tip, if you push first and then you turn the other direction and then you turn back, what does it do? Now, even if you just took any brush that you have and took it through just those maneuvers, then you would find that you've discovered several things that your brush can do that might help you to interpret foliage. Now, that's what the little rosemary 274 will do. There's another rosemary that's called the ivory, and this is the filbert version of the ivory. And so let's look at what happens if I do similar sorts of things. If I simply take the brush and I stroke the canvas with the tip of the brush like this, then if I push and turn, what happens? It's a little bit different. Suppose I push and then lift up and turn, what happens? Suppose I load the brush and on its tip and just sweep just the tip and kind of let up, what happens? Suppose I push and I begin to move and turn it in my hand as I'm moving, what happens? Suppose I push, I turn it counterclockwise and then clockwise again and let up. See what happens. You see, those are very similar. So that shows you that you really don't need a special foliage brush. You could create the sense of textures that you see in foliage with just about any brush you have. I'm not sure about a broom, like Helen Van Wyck suggests, but just about any brush you have. Now you can then connect, get to know your brush, you get to know all the things that it will do. Then you look at whatever you're doing and you interpret what you're seeing. So if I'm seeing these textures right here, I'm seeing these textures, then I might do something like this, that I'm seeing and I might, depending on how big I want to make it, I might pull it down like that. I'm just doing now a sequence of things that I just showed you. Sort of like that. Now, and then you can, once you learn and feel comfortable with those kinds of things, you can kind of put them together in different kinds of things. So, if I have foliage in the distance, then I'm just repeating or doing a pattern that repeats the same thing that you see me doing here. Only I'm not picking the brush up. So I'll create using a pattern like that, I'll create the shadow that I see in the distance, and then I might create the light that I see in the distance. Let's get more light than that. Create the light that I see in the distance. So it's a matter of first of all experimenting with your brush, and then getting comfortable with what it will do, and then look at photographs, or even go outside, and because in this state of Georgia there are no leaves outside right now except for the evergreens. But if you have foliage available, look at that foliage and see now what will my brush do that will interpret that. One other little thing I might show you is that if you have a cluster like this, then a cluster of shapes like that, then you might take a combination of what we did here, something like that, and pull those together like this, see? You don't have to have a formula to follow. All you need is to know your brush. So if you found this quick tip helpful, we have on our site with our full-length videos, we have a whole series just about brush strokes. So you can go into the site, cursor down, and you see that the series on the brush strokes. You might want to take a look at that. We have other full-length videos too. Look at the titles and see if you find something that's interesting. And if you have something that you'd like for me to do a quick tip on, leave a comment right down here and we'll put your suggestion on our schedule. And there's your quick tip.